Great. We're ready to get started. So first of all, thank you, Tripti, for making time for us on a Friday afternoon in the middle of a working day. Although we all know it is work from home and everyone seems to think it is a vacation time, which it's not. I think this is probably a crucial time for all of us to put our heads down and
Yeah, especially for startups, I think.
so I just wanted to sort of start this conversation establishing the context that a lot of people are worried about, travel and our money, especially probably, which is locked into our current travel plans or travel plans we have for the future. A lot of people are worried about what's happening in this environment and what we need to be doing about bookings we've probably made or all those funds that we've been putting aside for travel in the upcoming months. Before I get started, I'm going to start with a quick introduction of you, Tripti, and I'm going to leave it to you to sort of tell us a little more. So, Tripti is the co founder of Kite. Kite is a travel services company. Disclaimer, no, currently it is not making your bookings, it is not canceling your tickets. The scope of what Kite is trying to do is much broader than problems which are sort of easy to deal with. And Tripti is an alumni of IIM Bangalore, having spent years in travel, not just working in travel, but also Tripti, her husband, and her young daughter have a penchant for travel. And Tripti, I'm going to leave it to you to tell us a little more about you and Kite.
Sure. Thanks, Deepika. That was actually a great introduction. But just to take it a little step further, I am co-founder of Kite. Kite is a early stage startup. We are in the travel tech space, of course, like Deepika mentioned, but basically solving for cross-border movement. And what that means is how do you get authorization? How do you spend your money? How do you get insurance and make sure that you're safe in the country that you're traveling to? And how do you do immigration, etc. Right? So all the when we call it travel services, it's effectively everything that enables your movement. So
Yeah.
with the use of your passport, where we are currently today as a startup, of course, as I mentioned, we are very early stage but still trying to help in whatever capacity we can today, and also launch travel advisory, given the fact that now there's a lot of people outside of India, within India, who are looking for advice on what do they do about their travel, and hence sort of the context of this conversation as well.
Great. So yeah, at Basis, we opened out, this question to the community, asking them what are their worries when it comes to travel. So I'm probably going to dive straight into the questions, and I have some of my own, which I'm going to take the liberty of asking. To start with, Tripti, I just wanted to broadly ask this question: what are current restrictions that one should be mindful of? I know you and I were talking earlier, and I think there is a change like literally every couple of hours in terms of, who can leave the country and who can sort of come into the country. So, broadly, what are the things that one should be mindful of right now?
Yeah, so let's break it down in two parts. One is, the set of people who want to leave India and go abroad. That could be for the fact that they actually live abroad, they study abroad, work abroad, etc., and would have just come to India on their vacations. Actually, there's three parts, right? The second one could be people who wanted to travel for business or leisure, which we know with the travel season coming, a lot of people go
Yeah.
out. And the third is, people trying to come back. So I'll address each one of them. So the first one, for people who came into India and are Indian citizens and are now sort of here, obviously the travel advisory is that stay in India if you can and don't travel anywhere. Having said that, though, there's not too much restriction on you going out of the country, right? So if you did want to go back, let's say you are a student in the US and you wanted to go back, if the flight is operating, you are at the liberty to go. However, it's highly advised that you see what the quarantine process or the airport screening process in the US would be, as an example. Um, for the second part, which is people who would have to travel for business and for leisure, of course we know for business almost everybody has canceled their trip, especially
Yeah.
companies who have facilitated that. But people who were planning to travel for leisure, of course, again, being mindful of the situation, it's recommended not to travel anywhere right now. It doesn't matter if you already have a visa. Most places have said that those visas are no longer valid, or they're saying that if don't travel under that visa, then that visa expires anyway and you're going to have to sort of reapply, right? So the recommendation would be to cancel or get a reschedule on your trip. Um,
Okay.
and ideally push it out to at least 3 months out, right? Given the current circumstances, I don't think that things are going to get normal as far as travel is concerned for the next 3 months. So even if it opens up, it will be for more on the essential rather than non-essential travel. And then the third part is, people trying to come back into India, right? I think that's where the highest number of restrictions lie as far as, every
Okay.
day changing. So for the next week, starting this Sunday, no flights, no commercial flights will be landing in India from especially anywhere in Europe, right? But for the 1 week, no flights from anywhere in the world will be landing. So whether it's US, Europe, the UK or Middle East, it doesn't really matter, or Southeast Asia, no flights are going to be incoming into India for 1 week. Besides that, of course, till that time, which is I think 23rd March, there are flights landing into India, bringing in some people, but no flights are coming in from the UK or Europe. There are flights still coming from the US and Middle East, but Middle East will be a 14-day mandatory quarantine, which is a government facility. US is still not on the quarantine list. They are still suggesting self-isolation or self-quarantine, but I imagine that would change pretty soon.
Okay, so basically, I think for people going out of India, just being mindful of the fact whichever country which is allowing you to actually come in, or you're allowed to travel from India, be mindful of the fact that you could probably be asked to go into quarantine. Some
Yeah,
countries
so
have
there's
defined it,
two
and
things that are
yeah,
going to happen for sure. One is that you're probably going to be asked to be either in self quarantine or a government facilitated quarantine. But the second one is that at some point in time, they will close their borders. So you may get stuck in that country. So even if you make it there, you have to be mindful that you may be stuck there indefinitely, without knowing when you could come back. So if that is something up your sleeve and you want to be doing that, that's a different story and that's a different prerogative. But our recommendation, and I think everyone's recommendation at this point, would
yeah.
be not to do that.
Okay. So which brings me to the next question. I'm going to break this into two parts. This has to do with visas. I think there is also a concern for people specifically in other countries who are on timed visas, and the possibility that perhaps, in this situation that you're not able to travel back to India, your visa expires. So what happens then?
So in that case, under these circumstances, the embassies will extend your visa. So let's say that you are somebody from Bangalore and you went to the UK for a vacation, and your visa expires in the coming week, but you're not able to come back because of the restrictions India's put. They will extend your visa. So, but I do believe that there has been a little bit of chaos in terms of people trying to go to the embassies and embassies not necessarily opening doors to do that. Having said that, they are affirming to every citizen out there that it's not going to, they're not going to be penalized for overstaying, or have a sort of a stamp which says that you exceeded your visa. They will extend it at some point in time.
Okay, and which brings me to the next part of the question. For travel that we perhaps had booked for a couple of months from now, uh, are the embassies open for visa applications? What is the situation there? Yeah.
So there are, I want to say, almost all European embassies have shut down their visa applications right now. So they are not accepting visas. However, there are still Southeast Asian countries that are accepting, right? In fact, Japan
Okay.
has now included a waiver as part of their visa application that says, please, sign this COVID waiver, that you are accepting of, while applying for a visa,
Yeah.
and they're still issuing. Again, I think just because they are issuing visas doesn't necessarily mean that you'll actually be able to travel on that visa, because come that time, it'll depend on the situation then, and if that flight's going, whether you should be traveling or not, etc.
Okay. Okay. I think, yeah, we need to be mindful of that. Okay. Which brings me to the next question. I mean, I had this question, and I know, as did someone else from our community. So I had bookings made by Singapore Airlines directly for the month of April. Of what I understand, the situation in Singapore specifically seems all right. So should we probably be going ahead with that plan, or maybe cancel and expect a refund? I'm not quite sure where things stand on the refund front. I think every airline and
Yeah.
every, yeah, there's like, yeah,
So,
it's very
uh,
confusing.
so I'll answer about the cancellation part first, right? Almost every airline is now offering free rescheduling or cancellation for flights
Okay.
that is booked up till April 30th. which is a decent enough time if you're traveling in that period of time, which is about 6 weeks out. I think post that they'll still be reconsidering what the situation is, and they are also trying to sort of change their policies as quickly as they can. I do believe that even Make My Trip and sort of Yatras are offering free cancellation and free rescheduling on flights, right? So I think obviously if that's something that you can afford, especially for a leisure trip, I would suggest that you do that. Um, Singapore, although as an advisory, like you just mentioned as well, they're not necessarily reporting too many cases. They're generally very strict about their quarantine,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah, yeah.
so if you do enter that country again, you're planning to only go for 5 days, but 14 days is quarantine. That doesn't work out, right? Which probably means that you'll be stuck in that country for a while.
Yeah, and I think even the fact that everyone should be mindful of, and you're probably a better person to tell us that I think the quarantine facilities in all countries are not the same. They are not facilities that you probably want to be in. So,
Right.
yeah,
And
we just,
every country that changes, Singapore, of course, will be the exception there, the kind of levels they have. But of course, if anybody asked me if I would want to go through a 14-day mandatory quarantine in any country for that matter,
yeah.
I'd rather not. I'd rather stay put to where I am, just to be safe, even if it doesn't happen to be my home country, but at least I can be inside a home rather than a quarantine facility.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which brings me to the next part of this, which is so I had a cruise booked from Singapore to Thailand in May. Should I go ahead and process visas for that? And should I even go ahead with that trip at first? Yeah,
Well, you'll have to process two visas, right? You'll need a
yeah,
Singapore and a Thai visa.
Singapore and the Thai. Yeah,
Because now all Thailand visa on arrival has been cancelled as well, right? So for Indian citizens where visa on arrival used to be free, that you could go and do it at the port is no longer true, right? Which I would imagine that for most countries going forward, the visa process will change, right? It'll just become more stringent and stricter, adhering to, of course, what's happening in the world right now. But my recommendation would be that actually just postpone your cruise, right? And if you can get a refund, because most of these guys will give you a reschedule option, right? So rather take that, 6 months out cruise, probably a better time to go anyway.
okay, okay, great. Okay, so that was talking about international travel. If we were just to talk about domestic travel, and again, keeping in mind that it is summer vacations, April and May, a lot of people have made bookings to probably travel within the country, visit parents, etc. Is that something again that one should go ahead with, or you'd recommend, probably just cancel, stay put for a bit until there's more
Yeah,
clarity?
I think the misnomer out is that avoid international travel, which of course is true. But given the fact that the same level of infection exists within the country, it's just avoid travel. It's not necessarily avoid international travel. So, airports are taking precautions. Airlines are taking precautions. Of course, it's also very tempting because they're dropping fares as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, so of course it's very tempting, right? So unless you absolutely have to, maybe need to be with, a particular family member or something, I would recommend not to do it because, airlines and airplanes tend to be the highest places of contamination.
Yeah, I think the thing that's really tempting people, like you said, is the drop in fares, which are fairly significant. And yeah, and one would just imagine, for half the price, I'm
I think
probably,
saving a couple of rupees or at least hundreds of rupees is not equal to like just saving your health, right? So it's probably just
that's true.
safe than sorry.
That is true. And I'm probably going to digress from this part of it and go on to the importance of, and then I'd be happy for you to share any experience, the importance of perhaps having, travel insurance and a significant amount, because we tend to take the bare minimum when we're asked to mandatorily. So the need for travel insurance, probably irrespective of where you're traveling to.
Yeah, and I think that that needs only going to grow, right? I think people are now going to recognize that, traveling to any international country or any foreign land and not being covered is a huge dent in the pocket, right? So I think people used to, like you just said, used to do it just because it was required, not necessarily understanding the repercussions of what happens if you don't do it, right?
Yeah.
There's also now insurance companies coming up with, which we'll be working with as well, who are now offering, of course, related to these kind of effects in the world, and offering insurance to make sure that you're covered no matter where you're going. So even if you're going for essential travel, making sure that you're covered. We are also going to be working to make sure that you are covered only for the time period that you do travel. So just as an example,
Yeah.
that if you're traveling to Singapore for the 5 days, that you get insurance for those 5 days. At least you're covered for those 5 days, right? So yeah, I mean, there's different types of insurances out there, but at the end of the day, travel insurance is very different than trip insurance. So trip insurance covers like your flight cancellations and things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people are worried about now. But the larger thing that you should be worried about is this travel insurance of what happens to you as a person when you are abroad, right? So if you do fall sick and you have to visit the hospital or you have to go into ER, then what kind of coverage will you get? So I would recommend that going forward, every person buys travel insurance, and not just the minimum, at least a decent coverage, before taking off.
Great. Yeah, I think, yeah, the fact that you brought up that, travel and trip insurance are two different things. Trip insurance just covers you for refunds and probably damage to your, yeah, like
Right, baggage.
probably luggage and baggage. But the broader thing that you need is travel insurance. And I think we can't emphasize enough the need for that when you travel, irrespective.
I think
Probably now,
right
even,
now the world's a little different, where of course, if you happen to fall sick during this crisis, then people take it, they're providing treatment for free, and stuff like that. But as a general rule of thumb, that's not true, right? So if you do, let's say, go to Switzerland and you happen to fall sick and you needed to visit a doctor, that would cost you. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of European nations also make it mandatory for you to have an insurance. But again, people don't go above and beyond, especially not the Southeast Asian countries, which they should.
yeah, makes complete sense. And I know we've been talking a lot about this serious stuff, but Tripti, I'd love for you to share perhaps any experience of yours, which I know personally has prompted you guys to even begin with this endeavor of kites. So, what really goes wrong? Of course, not times like this, but even in regular times where one should be mindful of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our the genesis of Kite has really come from the fact that we love traveling, right? In fact, I would be one of those people who had like 2, 3 trips booked a year and way ahead of time. And I'm actually, I hold a Canadian passport, and as an OC, I live and work in India. But my husband, who's also my co-founder at Kite, he's an Indian passport holder and an Indian citizen. So every time we have to travel somewhere, he's running around and getting his visas sorted, while most of the times, at least again, pre-COVID world, I would be able to travel to whichever country without having too many visa restrictions. But I do believe that's going to change now, right? In fact, the other day we were just talking about the fact that now, even to go to Europe, Canadians and American citizens are going to need to do an ETA, which is an travel authorization. So I think that's really what made us realize that we've gotten a world where, even though we think that the world's becoming smaller and people are going cross border very easily, much more often, the need for embassies and governments to know who the traveler is always going to exist, right? And that's really why we came together to do this. And Kite, which wittingly also stands for Know Your Travel and Know Your Traveler, the idea behind that was saying that we'll make sure that whoever needs to know the details about the traveler knows that ahead of time, and we can reduce the friction of you moving across countries.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And going beyond the visa part, also, the fact that you mentioned, and I'm going to just like probably chime in as basis here, but I think the fact when you are looking to plan 2 or 3 trips or even one that big trip a year, it's important to plan your finances way ahead of it. I think people have the tendency to swipe our credit cards towards the end, much closer to these trips for whatever purpose that might be, which is a huge cost. And I do know you all are also talking about, and as do we, the need to start saving systematically towards a travel fund. And
Right.
currently, keeping in mind that I know I have a travel fund kept aside, which I probably can't put to use for a while now, just makes sense to park it in a place which, at this moment, I don't want to send panic waves, but just to put it in a place which could serve as an emergency fund of sorts. So, what are your thoughts on? Yeah.
I think it's always great to plan your travel, right? I've always been a proponent of, booking ahead of time and making sure that I'm getting the best deal out of whatever, every buck that I spend, right? So I think we should still think like that, right? Having said that, I think at this point in time, probably not fall prey to booking something in the next month or two just because prices are low. But having said that, maybe one thing to keep in mind is, free cancellations, 100% refundable trips, because you never know, things could turn around. Not in the next 1 2 months,
Yeah.
but in the
Yeah.
next 6 months, sure, right? Things will get back to normal. People will start traveling again. So it's definitely important to plan, right? Having said that, be cognizant of, again, what current events are like, and don't just park money where you don't need to. And like you said, put it in an emergency fund, so at least it's liquid and available to you.
Great. So great. So thank you, Tripti, for your time. I'm quickly going to summarize this conversation for those who probably joined in late. Yeah, be mindful of the countries you're planning to travel to. There are quarantine restrictions on various countries. The facilities differ. The number of days differ. You don't want to waste your trip in a quarantine facility. Also, the fact that be mindful of your visas. Maybe don't go ahead booking or probably applying for those visas on leisure trips, because not all embassies are even allowing you to do that currently. You can reach out to airlines and other facilities you book for travels, and quite a few of them are flexible currently in terms of refund. If not complete refunds, the flexibility to book for a later date in the year. And yeah, lastly, the fact and yeah, the that you need that travel insurance. It is essential, more essential going forward than it ever was before. And if you do have those travel funds kept aside, and we're going to use them later in the year, park them in an emergency fund. You don't know when you might need it for what reason. And yeah, I'm just going to end it at that. Thank you for your time, Tipti. I'm sure this was a helpful conversation to the community at Basis and to people at large. I think it's important to discuss these things from with experts and not WhatsApp forward. So yeah,
Great. Thank you for having me.
thank you. Yeah.
Right. Bye bye.